It all started with what seemed like an ordinary party, but the girl soon found herself humiliated by a ruthless killer. Her friend could only stand by and watch, too terrified to intervene because the monster standing before them was actually her own father. The story begins with a teenage girl named Mari, who has grown up in a loving and happy family, surrounded by love since childhood. Mari has always been especially passionate about swimming. After countless hours of training, she finally won the swimming championship this time. To celebrate their daughter's achievement, her parents decided to take her on a weekend getaway. They drove out to a secluded house in the countryside, surrounded by beautiful woods and a peaceful lake. After the family finished unpacking, Mari could barely wait to rest before wanting to meet her best friend, Paige. Her mother, Emma, was immediately worried because they had only just arrived in an unfamiliar area. She didn't want Mari wandering off alone, but her daughter's hopeful expression eventually softened John's heart. John casually handed Mari the car keys and even gave her some spending money for the trip. Before she left, Emma repeatedly reminded her to stay in touch and let them know where she was. But Mari was so excited about seeing her best friend that she completely ignored her mother's concerns. She quickly drove into town and arrived at a local convenience store where Paige worked as the cashier. The two girls hadn't seen each other in a while, so they immediately started chatting and catching up. Just then, a tall, shy-looking boy named Justin walked into the store. Under local law, minors weren't allowed to purchase cigarettes, so Paige politely refused without giving it a second thought. But Justin had already noticed what Paige liked and offered to trade her something she was interested in. Faced with the temptation, Paige hesitated because she knew she would be breaking the rules. Still, her curiosity eventually got the better of her, and she decided to go along with him. Mari then drove the two of them to Justin's house, where Paige asked her to wait in the car. With excitement building inside her, Paige followed Justin into the house without noticing the wanted poster lying near the doorway. As the minutes passed, Mari waited in the car, but Paige still didn't come back. A growing sense of unease finally convinced Mari to get out and look for her friend. But the moment she opened the door, she found Paige having a great time with Justin, completely forgetting that Mari was waiting outside. Feeling suddenly ignored, Mari couldn't hide her frustration and initially wanted to pull Paige away, but Paige's sweet words gradually calmed her down, and Mari eventually lowered her guard and joined in the fun. Not long after, Mari's phone suddenly rang, and it was her mother, Emma, calling to tell her to come home early. Mari was having too much fun to leave, so she simply told her mother that she planned to spend the night at Paige's house. But halfway through the conversation, the phone signal suddenly became weak, and the call was abruptly disconnected. Back at home, Emma and John were deeply worried about their daughter, but they had no way of knowing where she was. All they could do was stay home and anxiously wait for her to return. As night fell, everyone still believed it was nothing more than a fun gathering. None of them realized that this place was about to become a nightmare they would never forget. Just as the three teenagers were enjoying themselves, Justin's father Krug, his stepmother Sadie, and the violent Francis suddenly returned. The atmosphere inside the house instantly became tense, and Justin nervously introduced the two girls to Krug. Francis walked behind Paige and began staring her over with an unsettling look. Before Justin could even explain anything, Krug suddenly punched him and sent him crashing onto the bed. He then threw the wanted poster he had found near the doorway onto the bed. The moment Mari realized that Krug was a wanted criminal, a chill ran down her spine. Paige looked visibly nervous, while Mari forced herself to stay calm despite the fear building inside her. She cautiously assured Krug that neither of them would ever report him to the authorities, but Krug was ruthless and suspicious by nature, and he didn't believe a word either girl said. In his mind, the only way to stay safe was to make sure they could never talk. Francis pulled out a knife and began threatening Paige, leaving her completely terrified.
Damn it! Somebody help! Somebody help me! What?
Taking a nap. Shut up, Bullets.
Francis then grabbed Mari's phone and crushed it beneath his foot, destroying their last chance to call for help. Krug took Mari's car and drove them deep into the mountains. Intending to get rid of the two girls as quickly as possible, the car bounced along the rough road as they disappeared deeper into the dense forest. When they reached a fork in the road, Krug and the others realized they didn't know which way led farther into the mountains. For the first time, Mari saw a small chance to escape and quickly came up with a plan. She calmly gave Krug the correct route, using a harmless tone to make him believe she was genuinely helping. Mari's calm behavior and convincing lie actually fooled Krug and earned her a small amount of trust, but she never stopped thinking about how to escape. Even for a single moment, while the others were distracted, Mari quietly used her foot to activate the car's cigarette lighter. After the car had traveled a little farther, she quickly pulled out the scorching hot lighter. The struggle became so intense that the entire car began to shake violently. With Krug distracted behind the wheel, the car suddenly lost control and raced down the mountain. It finally came to a stop after crashing hard into a large tree. Everyone inside the car suffered injuries to some extent, but Francis was hurt the worst. With his nose badly broken, Mari also paid a terrible price for fighting back. Meanwhile, Paige took advantage of the chaos and fought with everything she had to break free. She then ran wildly into the depths of the forest, desperately trying to escape. Seeing her run, Sadie and Francis immediately chased after her. Panicking and running without direction, Paige soon discovered a nearby logging camp. She screamed for help with everything she had, but the camp was too far away for anyone to hear her.
No.
Before long, Sadie caught up with her, overpowered her, and forcibly dragged her back. Consumed by humiliation and rage, Paige began verbally taunting Krug, deliberately provoking him, but Krug took out his anger on her and brutally killed her without showing the slightest mercy. In the end, Paige never managed to escape her terrible fate. Mari could only watch helplessly as her best friend lay motionless in a pool of blood, her eyes filled with nothing but overwhelming fear and despair. But moments later, Mari herself became the target of Krug's rage and was subjected to further humiliation and abuse. Nearby, Justin could only watch in terror, clutching Mari's fallen necklace while drowning in regret. Yet despite everything he felt, he still couldn't bring himself to fight back against his father. A few minutes later, Krug finally stopped and gave Mari a brief moment to breathe. Mari forced herself to stand and secretly grab the rock she had hidden earlier. Then, catching Krug off guard, she swung the rock as hard as she could and struck him in the head. Before he could react, Mari turned and ran with everything she had. Relying on her knowledge of the area and her swimming ability, she quickly reached the lake. She plunged into the water, hoping the lake would give her one final chance to escape. A trail of red blood soon spread across the surface of the lake. Mari's body eventually stopped moving, leaving Krug convinced that she had drowned. Just then, heavy rain began pouring from the sky, and the group finally turned around and left. They had no idea that Mari was still alive, drifting helplessly across the water. At this point, you might think the nightmare was finally over, but the next twist was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Hours later, deep into the night, a violent storm swept across the area. Meanwhile, John and Emma were enjoying a rare candlelit dinner at their secluded house. Suddenly, a frantic knocking at the front door shattered the peaceful atmosphere. A strange feeling of unease crossed Emma's mind, but she still got up and went to answer the door. When she opened it, four drenched strangers stood outside with cold and unsettling expressions. Leading them was Krug, accompanied by Francis and the others. With his broken nose still visibly swollen, the atmosphere inside the house immediately turned tense and gloomy. Without asking too many questions, John and Emma kindly invited the strangers inside. Since John was a surgeon, he immediately offered to treat Francis's injuries. Emma was equally kind, constantly bringing the unexpected guests drinks and anything else they needed. She simply wanted to give them a little warmth and comfort during the terrible storm outside. They thought they were helping people in need. They had no idea that these 4 strangers were the very same monsters who had kidnapped, tortured, and nearly killed their daughter just an hour earlier. Before long, Krug asked to use their phone to call a taxi and get everyone into town. Emma willingly agreed and handed over the phone, but just as Krug made the call, lightning suddenly struck the electrical box outside. The entire house lost power, and the phone signal disappeared as well, needing electricity to continue treating Francis. John went downstairs to start the backup generator. Emma lit several candles to keep the house illuminated, but her curiosity eventually got the better of her, and she couldn't resist asking a few questions. Facing Emma's cautious probing, Krug calmly fabricated a touching story that completely put her at ease. John soon managed to get the generator running, and the lights inside the house came back on. After finishing Francis's treatment, John and Emma even offered to let all 4 strangers stay the night. But when Justin carried his coffee cup into the kitchen, he suddenly noticed a photograph of Mari on the refrigerator. His face instantly turned pale as he realized that this was Mari's home. The overwhelming fear and guilt became too much for him, and his legs could barely support him anymore. Emma noticed his strange behavior and assumed that he was feeling sick. Instead, Justin panicked and rushed into the bathroom, locking himself inside. He was consumed by guilt and fear, torn between hating himself for what he had done and fearing that the truth would be exposed. After finally calming himself down, Justin quietly placed Mari's necklace beside a cup in the kitchen. He had no idea that this small act would become the crucial piece of evidence that exposed every lie and revealed the killer's identities. Emma then showed the 4 men to the guest rooms across the hall so they could spend the night there. She returned to the living room and continued the romantic candlelit dinner with John, but suddenly, a strange and frantic noise came from outside the front door. Confused, the couple immediately got up and opened the door to see what was happening. What they saw left them completely stunned. Mari was lying on the ground, barely conscious and fighting for her life. The strange noise had actually been her desperate attempt to signal her parents for help. The gunshot hadn't killed Mari after all. Relying on her incredible swimming ability, she had fought desperately through the freezing water and somehow escaped death. John immediately carried his daughter back inside and began giving her emergency treatment. Emma turned toward the kitchen to grab some clean towels, but then she suddenly noticed the necklace lying beside the cup. It was a gift Mari had received from her brother, and Emma had personally seen her wearing it earlier that morning. Combined with Justin's strange behavior moments earlier, everything suddenly became clear. Emma realized that the 4 strangers inside her home were the very people who had attacked her daughter.
Emma!
But Mari was so badly injured that she couldn't even speak. The overwhelming pain quickly caused her to lose consciousness. Emma forced herself to stay calm and told John what she had discovered about the necklace. The moment John learned the truth, he was devastated. Regret and fury overwhelmed him, but neither of them allowed their emotions to take control. Instead, they quickly composed themselves and began thinking carefully about what to do next. While desperately trying to save their daughter, they silently made the same decision. They would make sure every person responsible for this paid a terrible price. But Mari had lost too much blood and urgently needed a transfusion at a hospital. The problem was that the storm outside was still raging, and they had no car or working phone. Then John suddenly remembered that there was a small boat stored in the shed. He realized they could use it to get out and find help, so he immediately headed downstairs to prepare it. Meanwhile, Francis went to the house alone, hoping to find something to drink, but the moment he entered the living room, he discovered Mari, the girl they had brutally attacked earlier that day. When Mari woke up and realized Francis was standing inside her own home, she was instantly terrified. Francis was still trying to figure out what was happening when Emma suddenly grabbed a bottle. Without hesitation, she swung it hard into the back of Francis's head, but to her shock, Francis was incredibly tough and didn't even fall. Enraged, he began advancing toward Emma, forcing her to retreat step by step. In a panic, Emma grabbed a kitchen knife and drove it deep into Francis's body. Yet even after suffering such a serious wound, Francis still refused to go down. He violently pulled the knife from his body and slammed Emma against the table. At the critical moment, Emma kicked Francis with all her strength and managed to break free. Just then, John returned and saw what had happened to his wife. The sight completely overwhelmed him with rage. Francis was clearly running out of strength, but he forced himself toward the window, hoping to call for help from his accomplices in the guest house. John gave him no chance to escape. he grabbed Francis from behind, dragged him into the kitchen, and violently forced his head into the sink. Francis struggled desperately and managed to pull out the drain stopper, but neither of them expected a garbage disposal to be installed beneath the sink. John didn't hesitate for a second before switching it on. Francis's arm was instantly pulled into the machine, and he screamed in unbearable agony. Looking at the man who had brutalized his daughter, John felt no sympathy anymore, only hatred. The gentle surgeon he had been moments earlier was gone, and Emma was no longer the helpless housewife who had welcomed these strangers into her home. After hiding Mari somewhere safe, the couple decided to continue making the criminals pay for what they had done. They quietly made their way toward the guest house across the way, but they soon discovered that Justin wasn't asleep at all. He was holding his father's gun, his eyes filled with disgust toward everything his father had done. When Justin saw John and Emma, he didn't hesitate and willingly handed the gun over to them. He knew that giving them the weapon meant betraying his own father, but after witnessing years of brutality, he had finally reached the end of his patience. John slowly stepped forward and took the gun from him. Unfortunately, the noise still woke Sadie from her sleep. Krug hurried back toward the house across the way, only to find Francis lying dead inside. Rage instantly consumed him as he realized they had somehow escaped into Mari's home. Meanwhile, John first helped Emma, Mari, and Justin get safely onto the boat. Then he grabbed a weapon and went back inside the house alone. Krug hid in the darkness, refusing to reveal himself. Once he calmed down, he immediately realized that Justin must have betrayed him. Hatred quickly filled his eyes. Inside the huge house, John and Krug began a deadly game of cat and mouse. One searched desperately through the rooms, while the other remained hidden in the shadows. The tension inside the house became so intense that every second felt suffocating. Eventually, John encountered Krug upstairs, and the two immediately began fighting. John was never a violent man, and he was no match for Krug's brutality. Desperate to survive, Krug attacked John relentlessly, showing absolutely no mercy. Within moments, John was covered in injuries and could barely remain standing. Krug then grabbed a weapon and tightly wrapped it around John's neck. John was moments away from losing his life. At that critical moment, Justin suddenly appeared behind Krug and aimed the gun at his father. Krug stared at him in disbelief, unable to accept that his own son would turn against him, but Justin was still too soft-hearted to pull the trigger. Seeing his hesitation, Krug knocked the gun from Justin's hand. For a moment, Krug was completely distracted and lost his chance to fight back. John seized the opportunity and, with Emma's help, finally managed to overpower and restrain him. But John didn't kill him right away. He wanted Krug to personally experience the suffering that Mari had been forced to endure. John first drove the speedboat to a safe location with Emma, Mari, and Justin. Then he turned around and returned alone to the house in the countryside. He walked into the kitchen and picked up the microwave he had previously repaired. What had once been an ordinary household appliance was now about to become an instrument of revenge. John forced Krug's head inside the microwave and pressed the button. As the temperature continued to rise, Krug screamed in unbearable agony. This film tears away the limits of human nature and exposes the darkness hidden deep inside the human heart. At the same time, it shows us just how powerful the instinct to protect one's family can become. Even after the credits rolled, I honestly found it difficult to shake off what I had just watched. Justin is a timid and fearful boy who has spent years living under the shadow of his father's violence. He's an outsider within this evil family, constantly caught between knowing right from wrong and lacking the courage to resist. Whenever his father pressures him, Justin remains hesitant and conflicted, never truly willing to accept what he's being forced to do. After witnessing the brutal violence firsthand, he finally breaks down under the weight of guilt and regret. He even begins trying to stand against his father. Krug, despite being terrified of the consequences. Mari, on the other hand, is a kind and resilient teenager with an incredibly strong instinct to survive. Even after enduring unimaginable humiliation and suffering, she never stops fighting for a chance to escape. Her determination to stay alive remains strong throughout the nightmare. However, Mari's rebellious side also plays a role in what happens to her. She ignores her parents' warnings, insists on going out alone, and easily follows a stranger named Justin to his home. Without enough caution, she unknowingly steps deeper and deeper into a deadly trap. What makes this movie truly disturbing isn't the satisfaction of revenge. It's watching ordinary human beings being pushed to the absolute limit and struggling between morality and violence. The parents begin as kind, ordinary people, but once their family is pushed into an impossible situation, they are forced to fight violence with violence. In everyday life, we can't always tell whether someone is truly good or dangerous. That's why we should never blindly trust strangers or follow someone into an unfamiliar and isolated place. We should also refuse suspicious invitations from people we don't know and always let our families know where we're going. Keeping communication open may seem simple, but it can become one of the most important forms of self-protection when something goes wrong.